Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone, once again to the Pan-African Activist Sunday School. We are so grateful that you are joining us once again. We had an incredible session last week where tens of thousands of people were reached. Thousands of you watched the first Pan-African Activist Sunday School on SARS and situating that in a larger history of activism in Nigeria. And we are so grateful that you are joining us once again. We want to start out by offering just a little bit of an introduction to the Pan-African Activist Sunday School in case you are joining us for the first time. So Nanre, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Great to be here today. And thanks everyone who's in this room right now and coming in later. It's really been a wonderful journey, despite all that has been going on in our lives these past few months, to come together as activists across continents, but with the same goals and ideals. Crystal and I have been, organizing on different fronts for most of our lives. And we came together, as researchers and as activists in the recent movement that's taking place right now at NSARS. And we just started to really think about and discuss with our comrades and our friends across the world what would be most useful. And we had several meetings with activists, based in Nigeria, activists across different continents to talk about what could really help at a time like this for those of us who are in the diaspora, working together with comrades that are on the ground. And we came up with this idea of political education. Being someone that has benefited from learning from activists on different continents most of my life, I really appreciated when different people from different walks of life, people from different organizations, powerful and strong organizations, were willing to come together to really create a shared and safe space for us to discuss how we can build the movement, a Pan-Africanist movement, and at the same time, very localized and relevant movements that are very relevant in our own individual context. And so we hope that by offering this, as colleagues, as comrades, that it's something that is useful to everyone who watches, and that it's used as a tool to continue to build and strengthen our movements in our individual walks of life, in our collective organizations, as well as across the globe, in the dream for a better Pan-Africanist, stronger Pan-Africanist movement.
Absolutely. And the only thing I would just add to what Nanre mentioned is that, as she mentioned, this really came organically out of an effort to be in solidarity around the world with the NSARS movement, which, as we know, started in early October and really raised international attention to the issues of police violence and state violence in Nigeria. But we know that Black people are fighting for our lives everywhere around the world. And we also know that when we look to our history, when we look to our activist legacies, we've been most effective when we've been connected with each other, right? When we think about Pan-Africanism as a history, a legacy, a practice that many of us are very much seeing ourselves carrying on, we know that what has helped us, what has helped our movements to progress, is to be in struggle with other movements, with other communities of Black folks around the world. And so we are hoping that this can contribute to the resurgence of Pan-Africanist solidarities and struggles. And we hope that this will be a space where we can learn. It is intentionally intergenerational, because we know that even for those of us who are perhaps younger generations of activists, we have so much to learn from. We are standing on the shoulders of our elders who have come before us and are still fighting alongside of us. So we want this to be intergenerational. We want it to be accessible. It's one of the reasons why we are coming to you on all of our social media platforms. And we also want it to be effective, right? As much as we are going to talk about, the nuances of our movement spaces that we are occupying and embedded within, we also want this to be useful and to provide practical tools, practical strategies, practical conversations and discourses that we believe can translate directly to the strengthening and the furthering of our individual movements and our collective struggles. And so we want to get things started and get right into our conversation today, which is all about thinking about the Black radical tradition and defunding the police in the United States. Obviously, between NSARS and Abolition Summer here in the United States, there are so many different connections, just as there are so many different connections with what is happening in the US and the rest of the world, right? And so that is really the focus of our conversation today. And we are really excited to be introducing our hosts and moderators for today. And I will take a turn to introduce Tone, who is coming to the screen. Tone is a Pan-Africanist dedicated to strategic organizing. She has several years experience in analytics and financial strategy. She organizes with a number of community groups and is a core member of Black Lives Matter Boston and the Boston Jobs Coalition. Tone also leads a virtual class on political education and is a cultural curator and community economic justice advocate. So thank you so much, Tone. Welcome to the mic. And I will turn it over to Nanre to introduce our second host.
Thank you. So just in the spirit, as Crystal said, of, an intergenerational struggle, which we're really building, we're trying to bring voices from across the continents and also across generations. So I'm proud to introduce a young activist up and coming, Iwa Twaida Maigun, and she's a feminist. She's a budding Pan-Africanist. We're bringing her into the movement, and she's also someone who she didn't say that, but she's been a host of TV and radio work as well. And so welcoming her to this space. Thanks, Iwa. Welcome.
Is that all you want to say, Nanre?
Is also my beloved daughter, and so really happy and excited for her to join us in the space today.
I just wanted to make sure that is known because we have families, we have generations of organizers that are coming into being, and it's really important for us to know that we are able to bring our loved ones into the struggle with us. So we will turn it over to Tone anyway.
Yes, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good evening to those both in the United States, in Africa, and all over the diaspora. We are so happy to be here with you. Again, as mentioned, my name is Tone, and it's just a blessing to be part of this Sunday school presentation. You are?
Hello everybody. I have been introduced. I'm a feminist, young and budding, and it's actually very fun to be here. I have been speaking a lot with Tone, and she has made me very excited to be part of the older generation, be having conversations and discussing all these ideologies. It has been fun, and I'm definitely sure that today is going to be a success.
Yes, thank you so much, Iwa. So yeah, it's very important, me being in the United States, Iwa being on the continent, that, we have this conversation that both, as Crystal mentioned, both intergenerational as well as representative of the diaspora at large. We are really excited for this program. We think it would be a wonderful learning opportunity, a wonderful sharing opportunity. As Iwa mentioned, her and I had a great experience just talking as we prepared for today, and we're really excited for what's in store. So as mentioned, we will be touching on Abolition Summer, particularly the 2020 uprising here in the United States. Our very capable speaker, Yane Ngo, will be speaking on the experience for the Abolition Summer. And I would like to just introduce her. Yane Ngo is born in the part of Lenpe territory known as Philadelphia. She is a freedom fighter, a writer, a singer. As an organizer, she struggles towards abolition of the liberation of capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism for all people. She's a coordinating committee member and the outreach coordinator of the Black Alliance for Peace, and a core organizer with Black Lives Matter Philly. She's a founding member of the Imatu Freedom Build and the Black Philly Radical Collective. So without further ado, we welcome Yane and what she has in store for Abolition Summer.
Thank you. So Yane Indigo, and I really appreciate this setting and my opportunity to be here with all of you. And so, yeah, this summer, the 2020 uprisings here in the U.S. that have been responded to with great solidarity with members of our community all across the globe, and in that same spirit, we are seeking to respond in solidarity with our siblings in Nigeria as they wage the same fight on their shores that we are waging here for freedom and liberation for ourselves and from systems that not only oppress us, but that hurt, harm, and even murder us. And so one of the things that happens a lot of times when it comes to building movements is that you'll have individuals or organizing groups who will recognize the importance of leveraging the struggles that we go through and that we identify as a collective community in order to create transformation that will free us from those same struggles. And you saw that, for example, with the bus boycotts. There were consistently people who were being kicked off of the buses in the South here in the US during the time when Black people were required to sit at the back of the bus if they were even able to sit at all. And there were times when if you were sitting at the back of the bus, your seat would be required to be given away to a white member of the community. And women, when they would refuse, would get arrested. And this was something that was known. And so the organizing movement in that moment prepared to use that when it happened again in order to mobilize the people and create transformation. And this is something that's happened in various locations. It also is what happened in Buenaventura more recently with mobilizing people in response to the struggles of not having the basic needs of water and power being able to be consistently in place. And they were able, the organizing community was able to mobilize the larger community to shut down the ports, which was a moment that enabled there to be transformation and shifting of power and embodiment of power in the community. And that same energy is what was recognized this summer when you had the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, the murder of Breonna Taylor, and the murder of George Floyd that happened back to back in very visual and very visceral ways. And that it struck something in the community here in the US, and the entire community rebelled against the reality that these incidents represented of how inhumane our systems are that are responding to issues that may arise in communities as they would with this militarized kind of response. And so the community, not knowing exactly what to do, knew something needed to be done and began to shift in order to go out into the streets in massive numbers all over the country and around the world in order to say, no, we are not going to take this any longer. And at the very least, I am going to show with my body, with my language, and through protest that this is not the world that I align with. And as a result of that, the organizing community saw this as while an unfortunate, like the things that happened that created this are not things that we desire. Obviously, this is not what we want, but we can leverage that moment in order to prevent it from happening, to begin to move us into a place where we can prevent it from happening again. And so the organizing community responded to the mobilizations with an organizing response. And so in multiple cities, there were a variety of progresses that were made. There were demands that were made across the community for primarily for the defunding of police, but that language around defunding police was specifically related to what was specifically framed in the context of abolition, and this was really important and significant because the conversation around abolition of police and abolition of the carceral systems that we consistently are being subject to, and the abolition of the occupation of our communities by these militarized forces is not something that people were ready to discuss even a year ago. And so this uprising has shifted the political understanding and the political readiness of the general community in a way that has been really exciting for the organizing community that's been ready and understood the realities that we need to confront, who our enemy is, that we are being engaged as if we're enemy combatants on our own shores, and that needs to be understood by the entire community so that we can come together and make transformation happen. And so I don't want to go too long in the interest of time, but that is the basics. And then you found in many communities, you found people who were ready, or council groups that were ready to in order to begin the process of removing police. You found organizing groups all across the country, including the groups that I organized with in Philadelphia, the Black Lives Matter, Black Lives for Peace, and collectively with other organizations, the Black Philly Radical Collective, in order to be able to put together a set of demands that really outline a vision for shifting resources from the abuse and the violence of our communities through the police and carceral systems that exist into community-empowered transformation that really takes care of our communities. And so all of these things are a part of what's been happening this summer that laid the foundation for our solidarity with what's going on in Nigeria, for our solidarity with our family in Haiti, in Venezuela, in Palestine, all across the country, in South Africa, which we'll be speaking about soon, and empower us to be able to transition to a place, to the world that we envision for ourselves, that is full of equity and justice and freedom.
Thank you so much, Yane. That was so important and a very good segue into our next section. As we know, these uprisings it's not a new concept. It very much stems from a long tradition known as the Black radical tradition. And our dear brother, Freeman, will be speaking on this. Iwa, would you like to introduce Mr. Freeman?
Yes. Brother Netfer is an organizer for the Pan-African Community Action on Coordinating Community.
We might be having some technical difficulties with Iwa, so I'm happy to introduce this very important speaker. As Iwa was describing, Netfa Freeman, is an organizer in Pan-African Community Action on the coordinating committee of the Black Alliance for Peace, and host for the radio show and podcast Voices with Vision. Netfa has been a political organizer, since 1985, and has been intimately involved with DC-based organizing work, in addition to numerous Pan-African struggles from Libya to Zimbabwe to Cuba. Welcome, Brother Netfa.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to get right into this topic because when I think of the Black radical tradition, it's not even just what I think about it. It's a very involved topic and we don't have much time. So I'm going to try to just go through my thoughts here in a way that hopefully dovetails into the topic of this discussion of this Sunday school. One is that I think it's important for us to understand, in order to glean what the Black radical tradition is that the dominant class of any society has a way of imposing an ethos on the people of that society. And so that is, and as the United States, is defined pretty much by a settler colonialism that has three pillars to it. And that is white supremacist patriarchal capitalism. So it's white supremacist because it was, and displaced indigenous people and enslaved Africans and stole us and brought us here to to work and toil to help build this settler colonial project, denied our rights and our humanity. Same with the indigenous people, and also is founded on the exploitation and denial and even the misogyny of women or any other male, anything other than male body, and it's capitalist to its core. And so the Black radical tradition, if we're looking at it from the time of the inception of this country all the way to today, can be identified by those things that challenge that ethos, challenge the ethos of the settler colonialism, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. I'm a materialist. I tend to take a materialist approach to anything, historical materialism. So if we are to study and understand the Black radical tradition, looking at it, how it transformed in terms of the material conditions at every stage, then it reveals, just like everything else, that it goes through transformations and evolutions and various manifestations in different periods. It's important for us to, and I know this is part of the objective of this particular form, is to instill in people and recognize and uplift the fact that we have to protect the integrity of the Black radical tradition if it's something that is going to inform our struggle and help guide our struggle. And for us to do that, then we have to recognize that history is the weapon of the oppressed. That means that as a tradition, the best way to understand it is to study and have a minimal level of understanding of our history in terms of it as a collective. There has to be a minimum level of understanding. And that means that in order to preserve the Black radical tradition, we have to be able to institutionalize a mass political education. And there's no other way to protect it but to institutionalize mass political education. One of the things that, when we start from the beginning, that we have to understand in order to make sure we don't get confused by the ethos that is imposed upon us in this country, is that Africans, those people, Africans in the U.S., at least those that are commonly referred to African Americans, things have transformed since then. We have a lot of people who, of the African world or people of African descent who are here who are not considered, or not, who are here because of the immigrants. But those prior to that, sometimes if we don't understand it, we think that the conditions of so-called African Americans, we don't remember that we didn't come here like everybody else. And so when people are talking about the interest we have and how we our conditions here, we have to remember that we're a colonized people. Settler colonialism, by virtue of us being stolen from the land, and then being also, it's important, and this is part of the Black radical tradition, is that we identify with our sisters and brothers, or our people on the African continent, as people who have had the land stolen from them. And so the Pan-European project, settler colonial, Pan-European colonial project, has stolen us from the land, has also stolen the land from us on the continent of Africa, and that should be a grounding force for helping us understand what our connections are. Now, we also should know, history has informed us too, that Africans didn't, the first Africans coming here weren't just from the transatlantic slave trade, weren't because Africans stole us. This is just a little detour, is that there was a book by, I would recommend people use it. It's not just read it, not just one book. It's called They Came Before Columbus. Now, Ivan Van Sertima wrote that book, and it talks about the fact, and I think it's very important that we know that we did have the technology and the naval capabilities to actually come to the Americas and visit here before being brought here by Europeans. That's just a little detour, and a lot of people don't know that, and they came before Columbus, and other such research has revealed that. Also, part of the Black radical tradition, I would go back to the Maroon, the struggles of the Maroons, and also the revolts of Africans, enslaved Africans like Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey, who also embody the most radical response to our colonization and enslavement in North America and in the Western Hemisphere. There's a Pan-Africanism that should be the part of the characteristics of the understanding the history of the Black radical tradition. In the first Pan-African Congress in 1900, all the way back in 1900. So understanding and identifying with Africa has gone back very far, even before the first Pan-African Congress in 1900, Sylvester Williams and W.B. Du Bois, and then we also see manifestations in United Negro Improvement, UNIA, Marcus and Amy Jacques Garvey, who started that organization and had us understand more concretely a more concrete identification and projects, transcontinental projects with our sisters and brothers and our people on the African continent. Then let me make sure got time. Okay, let me speed this up a little bit. I'm sorry. So one of the manifestations also, the culture, there's been a number of art and religion and different customs and ways of being that recognize that we have had to struggle for decolonization, domestic decolonization. It's important for us to understand that everything that characterizes colonized people, relationship from a colonizer to a colonized, fits the definition or the conditions, describes the conditions that African people, Black people in the United States face. And so if we don't remember that, then we can think we have the same interests as those who are bound up with America, who share the economic, political, ideological, and cultural interests, protecting Americanisms, I would say. A lot of people like Malcolm X explained this very well. We're not Americans, we're victims of Americanism. And so in that, it's important to understand, because then a part of the Black radical tradition is a characteristic of it is also understanding our right, and not just our right, but other people's right to resist and defend ourselves by any means necessary. We see formations in the Black that really characterize and leading up to most contemporary, the Black radical tradition, the Black Panther Party, and the Black Liberation Army, the Republic of New Africa, the Deacons of Defense, the North Carolina chapter of the NAACP under Robert and Mabel Williams, who understood that we have a right to take arms. Those who don't subscribe to the Black radical tradition would have us believe in a false Dr. King that said, oh, it's all about peace and nonviolence as a principle. We believe in nonviolence. We believe it's also a tactical, and when I say we, I'm talking about anyone who subscribes to the Black radical tradition, that this is a tactical and strategic position. It is not a principle. And the only way we should have the right to defend ourselves, and also understand that the road to decolonization may require violence, because the oppressor is very violent, and there's no other way to deal with the oppressor. It becomes clear that the struggle for liberation and decolonization is a struggle for power. And so right now we're talking about stopping things, stopping the repression that the police level against our people in this country. And the only way to stop that repression is to make sure that we actually have power to enact, implement to the decisions and policies and things that we think are necessary to stop this repression. So this is a question of control. The Black radical tradition, the history in terms of how we've had this deal with the frontline forces of imperialism and settler colonialism in the U.S. Is manifest or can be seen in the legacies of the Black Panther Party and their campaigns for community control of the police, that also believed in order for us to realize any type of relief from the occupation forces in our communities, who were there to enforce settler colonialism, and they're not there to fight crime. They're not there to do that. They are a result of capitalism and their extension of the state. They are not a capitalism, and those things are not a result of it. And as long as those things exist, there will be the powers that be will have the police. And so we have to start organizing And as taking our cue from those in the Black radical tradition, to be able to control how much resources go into the police, like the funding, to be able to refashion public safety, really having a vision of people-centered concept of public safety, means we have to have community control. And so they initiated as the community control of the police. We see formations of community control of the police now, in which people are believing that this is the way for this is the path, a strategic way toward defunding and toward and then eventual abolishment, and which is a decolonization. Lastly, I want to just talk about the inherent internationalism and anti-capitalism of the Black radical tradition. During the liberation struggles in the 60s and 70s, the people in the United States, at least the radical ones, and basically the grassroots people, identified immediately with the struggles for decolonization on the African continent and Latin America, and Cuba also, in particular, and there's other examples, but Cuba, this is it. Cuba was able to. There's a saying we have when Africa called, Cuba answered. But it wasn't just because they've sent doctors, they fought in a liberation struggle, but also Cuba has given asylum to our people struggling in the U.S. Political asylum to people like Sister Sata Shakur that people have known, Robert and Mabel Williams when they had to leave. And so there's an internationalism that's inherent in it. If we have leaders, people being called our leaders, who don't do anything, stand up against the policies of sanctions and blockades and destabilization of Cuba and Venezuela and other places, those people, they don't stand up to it. They can't be considered our leaders. They don't represent the Black radical tradition. If they're not for socialism, meaning total redistribution of the surplus that we labor for and we create as a working class, if they're not for that and they stand for capitalism, if they can't say it, they're not expressing, they're not exemplifying, or they don't stand as examples of the Black radical tradition. And then lastly is our political prisoners in the electoral process. We have to stand up for our freedom fighters who've been languishing in prison, new freedom fighters who will ultimately go to prison because of them standing up against the system in a radical way. We have to be prepared to struggle for them and their families. And we also have to engage, if electoral politics has any hope of giving any address, if it's only one end, then we have to be able to defeat the duopoly of the Republican and Democratic Party. That has to be a principle. And so we have to build localized movements that can mushroom into a collaboration, a cooperation amongst the various locales in which we're trying to build autonomy and self-determination. That's the Black radical tradition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Netfa. That was so valuable. The individuals you mentioned, this is so important for everyone to make sure they come back to this and listen to this part. The concept of Sankofa, of going back and fetch what you've forgotten. We must know this history in order to move forward. Thank you so much for that. So now we're going to segue to our dear sister, Shanti. She's going to teach us more about understanding BLM and the movement for Black lives and the uprising, and put things into context. And if I may, an introduction, Shanti Martin is an abolitionist and mother who founded Feed the West and the Black Market Kentucky to combat the food apartheid in Louisville, Kentucky, USA. She has written about politics and culture for Taj Magazine, Self Magazine, and the Courier Journal. Chantrice is a Black Lives Matter Louisville organizer focused on education, food justice, and economic autonomy. Welcome, Chantrice.
Hey, y'all. Can y'all hear me all right? I'm going to take that as a yes. All right, so boom. A lot of people don't realize that there have been so many uprisings. We hear about Nat Turner. We know about Harriet Tubman. But to Netfa's point earlier, a lot of people don't think of folks like Ivan Van Sertima, who are Pan-African scholars. So I want to talk about briefly going over some of the uprisings that have happened in our community. So we got the Stono uprising. That was in September 1739. It's in South Carolina here in the United States. It was the largest uprising, but people don't really talk about it. A few dozen white supremacists were killed during this uprising, and you heard the freed Blacks shouting liberty, right? So this is one of the things we don't really hear about back in 1739. Whoops. And then we have I got a new wig today, y'all. We have also the Mau Mau uprising. This is in Kenya in the 1950s. This lasted for 8 years. It's also known as the Kenya Emergency. It was a major step towards Kenya getting liberation, and a lot of people don't talk about that. Thankfully, we have our scholars now who are sort of starting to talk about that, but more than 1 million freedom fighters who were the Kikuyu were involved in this uprising. And it started with the 1940s, about 1945, Jomo Kenyatta, which many have heard of, who started speaking out about British rule. And so we talk about these because I know there are those shirts that say, I am not my ancestor, but I believe very firmly that I am my ancestors. Part of this series is to focus on intergenerational education, Sankofa, as we discussed earlier. And so it's absolutely imperative that we talk about those who came before us, because they're the reason we're here today. So I want to kind of frame this conversation with those two uprisings and then get into BLM and M4BL. So many people know this. I'm going to go quickly over the timeline of Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives. In 2012, you have George Zimmerman killing Trayvon Martin. And of course, the timeline, I could just go through a bunch of unarmed Black people who were killed by police, but I'm not about to focus on the tragedy. I'm more so going to focus on what we've done and how we've been proactive in this struggle. So then in 2013, that's when you have Black Lives Matter, the hashtag first popping up, and it's in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman. And then we also have, M4BL is starting to come out around this time as well. In 2018, we see that the hashtag is used over 30 million times since its inception. And then fast forward to today, in response to the killing of Breonna Taylor and others, other Black people by white supremacist organizations like police departments and local governments, we see these global uprisings that start to happen. Right. Part of the reason it has been so huge is because we had a pandemic, right? People no longer have the NFL to distract them, shopping and all these things to distract them. White folks are like, oh my gosh, there's racism? That's wild. I thought Obama fixed that, or I thought Dr. King fixed that. So people have to pay attention at this point. And I give a lot of credit to all the folks who have kept this on the forefront even before it was trending. Chanel from Black Lives Matter often says it's magical Negro season. And before this season began, people really had ample opportunity to ignore all the injustices. And so it is because of the spotlight that has been on things, because of the attention for Breonna Taylor and all that we've been able to push forward and make sure that these conversations are at the forefront. But it is a long struggle. Earlier, we talked about the Montgomery bus boycott. That lasted over a year. It was coordinated and organized. There were collaborations. And so it is important that we continue to have that same sort of energy as we move forward. Recently, this year in 2020, Movement for Black Lives also pushed major legislation. So we have the Breathe Act, we have the Move for Reparations. There are some individual counties and city councils that have pushed for reparations on a small scale. And we also see the rise of mutual aid, which is really important for organizations that are actually grassroots. We have some grass tops organizations that, kind of claim a similar mission, but it is, it's elitist, to be honest. So we want to focus on those that are grassroots, and that's what Movement for Black Lives and the Black Lives Matter movement are about. And again, this is not just about we had an uprising, good job, pat ourselves on the back. This is something we have to push. When we first started talking about defund police, a lot of people were like, well, what about all the rapists and murderers? And it's going to be chaos. But you have to think about this. Police do not stop crimes. They come after the fact. They get paid to be glorified secretaries with guns. They are just recording what happens after the fact. And a lot of people, when we first started discussing defund police and when the hashtag came out, right after Breonna Taylor was killed, right? You had you had a lot of people asking, well, like, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to protect ourselves? But the important thing to remember is that we keep us safe. I mean, this might be triggering for some folks, so I'll just say, give a little warning. I was assaulted in college, and of course, I called the police. And the police tried to convince me that I was wrong, that I was mistaken, that maybe, I had encouraged what happened. So when we think about defunding the police, it's defunding those types of re-victimizations that happen with people in general, but specifically with Black people and underrepresented and marginalized groups. So it is absolutely imperative that we get out of the slave mentality and we start to focus on abolition, abolishing the police, rejecting reform, because we are living in the reform that they promised us would solve all these issues of race, right? So we also have, the body cameras were supposed to fix everything, and diversity training was supposed to fix everything. But we can see that the more we give into reform, the less likely it is that we will be safe as Black people. We will be safe as, marginalized groups. And so the last thing I'll say is that one really good website to go to that we've developed here at Black Lives Matter Louisville is investdivest.org. There are a lot of resources there, and it's not just one group. It's not just one leader. We have to think about decentralized leadership. We have to think about ways to maintain the uprisings, how to keep coming for their next, because if we don't, no one else will. We have to keep us safe. So a few ways that we can do that is posting daily, making weekly calls, whether it's to your mayor, your governor, using those hashtags of our comrades all across the world. We have folks on this right now who are in Kenya, who are in Nigeria, who are all across the United States, in the Caribbean, in Europe. And so we have the power, we have the ability to keep ourselves safe, to collaborate again across different zip codes. And it is, it's our responsibility to take care of ourselves, because if we leave it up to the oppressor, we will just continue to be oppressed. And I call on anyone, regardless of if you feel like you're an activist or not, to step up, because these uprisings, they're going to require stamina. They're going to require mental and physical stamina. And so we have to involve our elders. We have to involve the children. We have to get active and stay active. I'm so serious about this. Yeah, I know we have bills and jobs and things like that, but if we are going to truly get freedom, then we have to be willing to sacrifice some things. And some white folks who I know are watching this are going to have to get uncomfortable, and you're going to have to stay uncomfortable if you're truly going to be an accomplice and not just an ally or not just a bystander. So this is pretty much my presentation, but I'm very thankful for the Sunday schools, because we have an opportunity to grow this much bigger than it was at the beginning. And, I feel blessed that we have this space.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chantrice, BLM Louisville. It is so important. What do we do next? We know that we must organize. We must feed our people. We must work together. It's very, very important. And as we kind of move on in this section, we want to think about what's next. What do we do? Next, we'll be talking about a vision for abolition, specifically the 13 demands, of Black radical from the Black Radical Collective. I will allow, please, Iwa, introduce Crystal in this section. Iwa, you're muted.
I'm not muted. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yes. Crystal Strong is a core organizer with Black Lives Matter Philly and the Black Philly Radical Collective. She's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, where her research and teaching focus on youth and community activism and the role of schools and sites of struggle in Africa and throughout the African diaspora. So,
thank you. Oh, thank you so much, Tony and Iwa. I'm so grateful to have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the work that we have been doing around abolition in the city of Philadelphia. We know that, as we are hearing from our incredible speakers so far today, that our uprisings that we're seeing in 2020 are a part of a larger historical trajectory, right? Like, we are building on longstanding global Pan-African struggles. We are building upon this longstanding Black radical tradition. However, as much as we understand these struggles, our recent uprisings as interconnected, they are also distinct and hyperlocal, right? And it's very important for us to understand local conditions and local struggles within this larger Pan-African movement and movements. And so I'm really happy today to talk a little bit about the view from Black Philly. And I'm very excited to introduce some of the substance of what we have been doing as part of the Black Philly Radical Collective. I'll explain a little bit about how we have tried to make abolition and the struggle around policing very concrete here in the city of Philadelphia. And first, I want to offer a little bit of context, particularly for those of you who may not be super familiar with Philadelphia and what our struggle looks like in the city. So first of all, Philadelphia has an extensive revolutionary Black tradition. Philadelphia is a city that had the largest free population during slavery. Philadelphia is the third largest Black urban community in the United States. We are also one of the most aggressively policed cities in the United States. We are the poorest large city in the United States. We are also the site of one of the most horrific incidents of police violence in the United States. Some of you might be familiar with the MOVE organization and the city's bombing of the MOVE organization home on May 13th, 1985, that killed 11 people, including adults and children, and it burned to the ground 2 city blocks. And so here in the city of Philadelphia, when we talk about police violence, we are not talking about recent police violence. We are talking about decades upon decades and over 100 years of police violence against our Black communities. And so part of what I really want to emphasize here is that because of these conditions, they are prime for revolutionary activity. It is one of the reasons why Black Lives Matter Philly, which our wonderful moderators mentioned I'm a core organizer with, it's one of the reasons why BLM here does not exist in a vacuum. We have a very rich, extensive, radical organizing community. And so when George Floyd was murdered, the Black Philly Radical Collective was born. Something about George Floyd's murder, and particularly the uprisings that formed around the United States, it felt different. The conversation was different. The way that people were talking about policing and how we should move past reform felt different. One of the things I remember witnessing just in the news that made me feel like, wow, we are in a moment in which revolutionary possibilities feel more possible. We saw in Minneapolis them burn a police station on fire. And this is not something we typically see here in the United States. And I think that signaled for a lot of us that, more of our communities, more of the masses are really open to a radical transformation in the fundamental structures of policing, but also this society. And so the Black Philly Radical Collective is composed of a growing number of Black radical organizations that understand ourselves to be abolitionist. We are unapologetically radical. We are unapologetically non-reformist. We are unapologetically abolitionist. And so in the midst of the beginning stages of, the uprisings and response to George Floyd's murder, that first week, we saw the need to come together to articulate a vision for what abolition is, because we noticed that the state and reform-minded individuals and institutions were actually moving to de-radicalize this moment of radical possibility. And we wanted to stand in that gap and offer a vision of what real abolition could look like in our city. And so my goal for the short time that I have here is to share the 13 demands that the Black Philly Radical Collective came up with. If you would like to learn a bit more than what I'm going to be able to talk about here, you can go to www.blackphillyradicalcollective.com. And I'm also going to be sort of quickly going through the demands that are a part of our vision for abolition and tell you a little bit about the progress that we've made so far. So just to sort of start us off, the way that we framed our demands was end the war against Black Philadelphia now. We understand ourselves to be under attack, right? And one of the things that we said is that during this time of rebellion against police terrorism and state violence, we, the radical Black organizing community in Philadelphia, we make the following immediately actionable demands upon the city of Philadelphia to abolish, by which we mean to permanently and holistically eliminate the structures of policing and related state violence endangering our communities. And so we took a strategy of introducing 3 demands as part of the larger 13 demands that we were going to apply pressure to the city to respond to immediately, or else we would continue to be in the streets. And over several months, we were incredibly active. We had dozens of protests. We had tens of thousands of people coming out on a very consistent basis. I mean, we had our most recent protest last week. So that is simply to say that even though the news is not still paying attention to what is going on here, we have been very active in continuing to apply pressure and advance our struggle. And some of that was reignited because of the murder of Walter Wallace Jr., which I want to believe many of you heard about. So let me get into these demands. Our first demand was that we wanted an authentic defunding of the police budget. One of the things that often happens is that the police, cities, states, they pretend that they are making actual financial reforms, but they're not. What they're usually doing is just moving one budget item to another area of the budget, and they're not actually winnowing away at the financial resources that the state disproportionately puts into policing. And so we said to them, we see what you were trying to do, and we want to let you know that we only want an authentic defunding of the police budget. Secondly, our demand too was we called for the end of the criminalization of Black resistance. One of the things that often happens in these moments of struggle and uprising, and we saw this in NSARS, they arrest hundreds of people, thousands of people, hit them with bogus charges. We saw a really heightened level of militarized response through tear gassing. Police were in riot gear. There were military tanks that were on residential streets. And so we affirm that our resistance is righteous. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. And so if we are going to be advancing our struggle, we have to protect our fundamental right to resist. And we have to resist any effort to criminalize Black resistance. And another thing I'll mention about this is that some of you might have heard about the federal government targeting protesters related to the George Floyd uprisings. One of our dear comrades and community members was one of those individuals who was targeted. They attempted to hit him with charges, bogus charges about arson that would carry a minimum 7-year sentence. So this is very real, the way that resistance is being criminalized and targeted. And then our third demand was to remove all symbols of state violence. One of the things that is very common within these regimes is that there is a sort of celebration of the very purveyors of violence that we are fighting against. And so one of the things that was the immediate first action of our local administration was to remove a statue and monument honoring a former Philadelphia mayor and police commissioner who is very notorious for targeting Black communities. He was a part of the targeting of the MOVE organization in 1978, which resulted in the prolonged political imprisonment of the MOVE 9. And so we say that we want to remove not only the structures of state violence, but the symbols of state violence that governments choose to celebrate. And let's go to the next slide. Our fourth demand is we call for an immediate release of political prisoners. This should go without saying, but the prison in our reckoning is a fundamental extension of police violence. And so when we talk about police targeting us, we have to recognize that the destination that they want our folks to go is the prison. And so if we want to remove the threat of policing, we also need to remove the prison. And so we want our longstanding elders, people like Mumia Abu-Jamal, people like Russell Maroon Schultz, to be released. Some of these individuals have been incarcerated for decades, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, right? And so part of our struggle is releasing our freedom fighters. And also demand 5, releasing our vulnerable prisoners. In the state of Pennsylvania, they already passed a decree because of the pandemic, that people who are medically vulnerable should be released from prison. They have not adhered to this policy. And so we do not believe that being incarcerated should be a prison sentence, particularly because we are in a pandemic. And so we call for the immediate release of vulnerable prisoners. Demands 6 and 7 relate to overhauling police accountability. Just like in Nigeria, just like around most of the world, police are not accountable to anyone. They are able to kill us with impunity. Could you go back to the previous slide? They are able to kill us with impunity. They are able to extort us, bribe us, harm us. And so Demand 6 says that we would like to, when the police murder us, they should be fired without question. And Demand 7 talks about the abolition of the police union, which here in the United States is the Fraternal Order of the Police. They are part of the ways that police are protected. And we also have a so-called police advisory commission that is supposed to provide oversight, but we know that these are toothless. They do nothing to curtail and hold police accountable. And so we want all of these structures abolished and that there be community control as we move toward abolition. Next slide, please. So the next two demands relate to our fundamental belief and affirmation that Black people deserve to live safely without the threat of state violence. We exist here under military occupation. That is why there are government programs that transfer military equipment, military force to our local police forces. And so we understand the connection between militarism and policing, and we want an end to the occupation of our communities. Similarly, our 9th demand says that we deserve the right to protect ourselves. One thing that we see here in the United States is that there are communities, mainly white, propertied communities, who are able to protect themselves, who are able to openly carry, who are able to do a variety of things to terrorize protesters and to protect themselves. But when Black communities, when oppressed communities do the same, we are thrown in prison, we are criminalized. And so we affirm that we have a right to protect ourselves. The next slide, please. The next two demands are about fundamentally understanding that policing is the tip of the iceberg for carceral systems, and that if we really want to get at the fundamental removal of state violence, we have to remove policing in all of its forms. So when in Demand 10, we talk about the ending of carceral systems, we're talking about things like cash bail, we're talking about warrants, we're talking about parole, we're talking about probation, we're talking about immigration and detention, and we're talking about the criminalization of sex work. We know that all of these structures exist to criminalize Black people, to criminalize poor people, to criminalize people who are genderqueer and diverse. And so we realize that all of these structures must fall if we are to end state violence. And similarly, policing is not simply a public matter. We have campus private police forces. We have police forces in our transportation networks, in our housing networks. And so we really have to understand the fullness of how policing exists in our society and remove all of those forms. And then finally, we understand that if we are to really, the next slide, please. If we are to truly remove the systems, the sort of white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist systems that continue to not only devalue Black life, but to extinguish Black life. And they have done so from the time that Black people were brought to these shores against our will. We have to address these things through economic justice. And so one of the things that people don't always understand is that abolition and even the conversation about defunding, it is saying that in the city of Philadelphia, for example, the police take up $750 million in our annual budget. That is almost $1 billion. This is the same government that says they don't have enough money for schools. They don't have enough money for healthcare. They can only give us a small stimulus check for COVID. And we say, where are your priorities, right? And so we want to our communities instead of the cops. And apart from that, we also demand reparations. We demand reparations, and we understand that that is a fundamental part of redress for centuries of state violence against Black people. And so on that note, I will end. And thank you all for listening to a bit more about what this looks like on the local level in Philadelphia. And I also just want to finally say that when we really talk about abolition, we have to understand that it is a practical matter, right? That there are steps involved. It is an incremental process, but one that we think we can advance quickly if we have the appropriate vision.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
So much, Crystal.
That's excellent and very, very needed. I just want to take this time to remind folks to comment and if you have any comments and ask questions. We've received so much information, so much history, so much context, and it's really helpful in this framing. So please let us know if you have those comments and questions, and feel free to write them and ask of our speakers. It's been so rich. Now, speaking of our speakers, we're going to transition to our panelists. And you guys are going to introduce folks who haven't been introduced just yet.
Yes, so we'll be adding there'll be two additional panelists joining us. The first person is Erin Green. Erin Green is an intersectional human rights advocate based in the Bahamas, whose work focuses on LGBTI rights, women's rights, and food security. Erin has worked with local and regional organizations, including the Rainbow Alliance of the Bahamas, SASH Bahamas, CAFRA, and Carry Flags. Erin is also an improv political satirist, actor, and a performance and visual artist. She is a regular contributor at the Guardian Talk Radio and is also a co-host on Morning Blend with Dwight Strachan.
And in addition, we're also introducing Tunde Ozua. He is the coordinator of the U.S. Out of Africa Network, which is the organizing arm of the Black Alliance for Peace. This is U.S. Out of Africa Shut Down AFRICOM campaign. Welcome, Erin and Tunde, and all of our panelists today. So, Iwa? Okay, I think we might be having oh, there she goes.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Oh, yes. So the first question is on the aspects of the leaderless and the leaderful movement. So the Black Lives Matters and the movement for Black Lives has become known for its critiques of leadership and decentralized non-hierarchical approaches to the leadership structure in the movements that they have been carrying out. We saw the same thing. We also in Nigeria here use the decentralized system in our protest. And I want to ask that, why has this approach to leadership and organizing emerged in the political movement? And if possible, are there any downsides to using this approach?
I want to jump in. I don't really have a downside, but one thing I've seen is that people are tired of the established or elitist organizations, regardless of what race the people who run it are. We're tired of seeing them cooperate with the police. We're tired of seeing them cooperate with the same institutions that continue to oppress us unapologetically. And so what I've seen this year especially is people being willing to use more of an Ella Baker model of leadership, saying like whoever can lead, should lead. You don't have to have a background. You don't have to have a pedigree. Like if you are willing to go sweat and do the work, then you are a leader. And I think that's been really powerful for people to say, like, I don't have to have gone to college. I don't have to like know every Malcolm X quote. As long as I'm willing to stand up and fight, then I'm a soldier. And that's really powerful for people, especially in this time where so many are being denied opportunities for leadership in various organizations.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in with that as well. I think that, to Chantrice's point, that there are a lot of gifts and skills that are found in our community. And when you elevate certain individuals, you are also muting or putting down others. And so the movement itself ends up not benefiting from the range of gifts and skills that are found in our community when individuals are not given the room and space to insert their particular form of leadership. And leadership, we have to also have a broader understanding of what leadership means. Leadership does not simply mean making all the decisions, which there should be no one person who would be doing that, or no small group of people who should be doing that for everyone anyway. But it also means that, it may be the way that you invite other people's voices to the table might be a form of leadership. The way that you model, like getting shit done, might be a form of leadership. And so there are a lot of ways that individuals can actually provide and present leadership when you give room and space for various forms and various types of leaders and leadership. And actually, one of the things that happened in Philadelphia, we had a protest, an actual physical protest, where large numbers of the homeless community came together and put together a protest encampment. And there was a period of time when there were people who were owning leadership. And when those people were stepped away or were pushed away, there were individuals in that space who literally talked about the fact that they were able to present skills that they didn't even know they had, because room was made for them to actually begin to step up and step into roles and see what it is that they were able to do. And so it actually also is harmful when we take that away from our larger community by taking ownership of full amounts of leadership for ourselves or imposing that on others. It also exhausts our community, because individuals who are imposed, a lot of times we impose leadership and we say this person is our leader. And that actually will fatigue individuals because no one can be everything. And it also really undermines the security of our movement, because then all you have to do is cut off that head, and then everybody is confused about what it is that they need to do and where they should go and who they should follow. This particular model of leadership really encourages individuals to get involved, to really challenge themselves, to grow, to really deepen their analysis so that they are able to actually be effective in whatever way they provide leadership. And so that no matter what one person does, if one person is removed, now you've got a massive community that can think for itself, that can drive itself, and the movement keeps going. So that's the benefit. I agree. I can't figure out what the downside would be for the movement. The downside for the individual might be that this individual does not get as much access to power and resources as an individual as they could if they were provided that kind of leadership. But we don't need people to be compromised with that kind of access and that kind of power. Their power needs to come from the appreciation that the community has for the results that they are able to get as a result of their particular form of leadership that they offer.
Thank you.
So I wanted to jump in on this as well. And I really appreciate Chantrice and Yane's comments, because I think, the way that this generation and this period of struggle has really emphasized leaderfulness, I actually think is one of the most important contributions that we have made to the Black radical tradition. They've emphasized already the importance of, having an expansive understanding of what is needed for liberation. And part of what I'm hearing is really recognizing that we need every person. We literally need all of us. We need all hands on deck for freedom. And so when we suppress the development and the expansion of leadership, we are also actually, ironically, undermining our own ability to be free, right? But the thing that I also want to mention is that it's very important to recognize that the traditional, hierarchical approach to leadership, the way that we in many historical moments have had individuals elevated as the leaders, right? Like if you think about how we discuss the civil rights movement, how we discuss Pan-Africanism, how we discuss Black power, you know, it is often the stories of individuals, right? And it is often the stories of individual men. Let's be real. And so I think, you know, one of the things that it's very important to recognize as well, hi, we have a new panelist. Nice to see you. One of the things that's really important to recognize is that this is also what the state wants, right? Like they actually want a situation where it's very easy to pick off and to de-radicalize a movement. And it's very effective to do that when there is concentrated power in individuals, right? So you kill Patrice Lumumba, you kill a number of our freedom fighters, right? You kill these individuals and the movement appears to die, right? And so I think it's also important to recognize that there's an element of self-preservation that is why a leader-full approach is most effective, right? And also, you know, we see in this political moment that it's actually the so-called leaders who have the most reformist and least radical perspective to offer. And so I think we really need to question, what do, you know, legitimized, recognized leaders have to offer us? Because very often they are there because they offer us the least radical or the most acceptable version of radicalism for the state. And then the final thing I just wanted to say is that I also don't think we should romanticize the challenges of leaderfulness, because when you have decentralized movements, it's a whole lot harder to coordinate, right? It's a whole lot harder to move because you have to attend to these various sites and parts of the movement in the community, right? And so it's not easy. It's a lot easier to have a centralized power structure. But it's not the most radical or revolutionary option. It ultimately won't get us where we are trying to go.
Thank you very much. That was very full. We're going to transition a bit to the defund versus abolition conversation. You know, we've heard rallying cries of like divest, you know, before. Defund and abolition, defunding and abolishing the police gained traction during the 2020 uprising. And as a core demand in the US, there is still a lot of debate and confusion for some people around the difference between defunding versus abolition. What do these terms mean to your organizing work, and why are they important as aims?
I want to hear some male energy personally before I jump in.
Right? You know, we can all have something to say, but we want to hear some other voices.
Okay. I think this might be a first. It usually is telling the Jews to shut up. No, but that's actually, it's also somebody having to tell them to shut up. But okay, so when I think about this question, you know, and it is interesting. I come from the I don't know if you want to call it come from, but we work on the campaign PACA, Community Control of the Police, and have engaged with abolitionists around this question of community control. This was actually before we were hearing about the defund. And in fact, we were part of the reformation of the National Alliance. We are part of this alliance now, the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, that took place just last fall, before, you know, right after, you know, just last fall. And then the pandemic hit, and then the George Floyd uprising. It was interesting because, well, one of the, I think that we have to be careful in the sense that many people who say defund, advocating defund, are abolitionists. But we have to make sure that the abolitionist aspect of it stays true, because it's easily for people it's easy for the powers that be, especially if it's a demand leveled against those who are in power, and not really thinking about the fact that it's the state, that the police are really an extension of the state and facilitators of the capitalist system and carceral state, that we have to really be talking about the system, and that the powers that be, if they're left and the demand is really not really a strategic movement, very planned out. That's how we can actually shift for power. If it's left to them just for the implementation and the enactment of it, they're never going to do that. They can finagle it. They can reduce the budget a little bit. They can shift things and say this and that, and never be implementation. And I think also maybe it was Crystal that just raised the issue of some of our leaders and people are disingenuous. They're really not about anything, and so they'll easily try to co-opt the language of the movement. We've seen co-optation of language before, and demands before, and so we want to make sure the people who are really trying to drive for the fundamental changes in the system have to make sure that demand keeps its integrity and keep its ultimate goal. That's what I think is important. And I think we want to, because I think we've seen it. We've seen it recently, where they've just done a little bit here and there, and it's not really being carried out or advocated for by those who have more radical purpose in mind.
Thank you. Do any of our other panelists want to add to this?
So I'll jump in because the beginning of the year, or maybe the end of last year, I went back and forth on this a lot. Like, do we defund or do we abolish the police? And I think it's a both and type of situation. Huey Newton, as flawed as he was, he talked about, like, what do we do for survival pending revolution? I think it is absolutely necessary to defund the police. We have to do that because until we defund the police, we are incentivizing the killing of Black people and the occupation of Black communities. But we also have to be constantly working towards abolition. As we talked about earlier, anything less than abolition is reform, and reform is the status quo. So I think the difference between defund and abolition is that, in my eyes anyway, defunding is a prerequisite or a first step. As we're on our way to abolition, we have to abolish not just police, but the prison system and, these education systems that teach our children that we're inferior. So it's a major thing, but I think defunding is one milestone that we need to reach on our way to abolition.
I can comment. I was thinking Crystal might want to offer some. Crystal, did you? Okay, I can comment. I think that the way that our, in Philly, the way that our demands are set up, it is particularly using defunding as a step, as you said, Chantrice, towards abolition, and it is very clearly explained in our demands. And we see and recognize that there's there's varying levels of readiness for abolition. Like, we're at a place where the community is ready to talk about abolition, but not necessarily ready to dive into abolition. And so the conversation around defund is something that supports that shift in that movement. And it also gives us the ability to actually build the alternatives that we're seeking, and not have the pressure of taking on what the reality of our communities are dealing with in an instant. Because the reality of the way that the U.S. government has sanctioned our communities has created very extreme conditions and extreme reactions. The sanctioning, along with the traumatizing of our communities, it creates an environment that does cause there to be crime and a lack of community and a lack of safety and security. And so we need to rebuild that sense of community and that safety and that security in our communities. And as we do that, and we also identify the ways that we can keep our communities safe, and institutionalize and systematize ways for us to keep our communities safe, we can build that while we are removing resources from these militarized components and these militarized systems that traumatize our communities and impose violence on our communities. And so over the course of that period of time, we are looking to build while we also dismantle. And that's what the defund conversation enables us to do. So by the time we have finished defunding the police, we have built the alternative that we need, and our whole community actually is able to be on board because they have been able to see and feel the result of building community safety and security.
Are there any additional comments from our panelists on this topic?
Just, I know people see the scrolling, but definitely visit investdivest.org because it breaks a lot of things down, but also those are resources for everyone who is in a decentralized movement to use so that we're not building things from scratch. Our ancestors have already done a lot of the framework for this. Our co-collaborators in Philly, in Nigeria, all across the country, Boston, have done a lot of this work. So it's going to be a better use of our time, not just our website because we made that site, but all of these different chapters have done a lot of work. And if we can share each other's, that makes each movement more powerful and more cohesive.
Okay. So that's it. We're going to do, in the spirit of educating here, we're going to talk about imperialism in the policing and militarism with a short video. So please stay tuned. Again, if you have questions and comments, feel free to put them in the chat.
I think we're having a little bit of sound difficulty. Maybe someone else could try to share the video.
If you drop the link, I'll click on it.
So maybe if you can just talk a little bit about the topic while we get the tech set up.
Would you like to start the African video?
Hello?
You can hear you.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, yes. Okay. The struggles around policing and state violence in the US and Nigeria show that there are important connections to be made between policing, militarism, and imperialism if we are to end state violence against Black people around the world. What do we need to understand about these connections between, particularly with the expansion of AFRICOM on the African continent?
So it looks like we're playing the video.
Yeah, so if no one wants to answer that first, I'll go ahead and hit play.
I'm sorry. What's the question?
I can answer it, but
We're trying to play the video first. So
police violence carried out against Black and other non-European. Militarized police violence carried out against Black and other non-European colonized peoples domestically, and the brutal violence of the U.S. military and intelligence agencies abroad are two sides of the same white supremacist colonial capitalist coin. That is why for the Black Alliance for Peace, it is vital that the public understand this connection. The U.S.-made bombs bursting in air remind us that U.S. imperialism is still alive and well. The U.S. commitment to the concept of full-spectrum global dominance is carried out in many forms, including 11 command centers that are headquartered across the world. The U.S. Africa Command, or AFRICOM, puts most African states under the effective military control of the United States. The Indo-Pacific Command is the counterpart to AFRICOM in the Asia-Pacific and is being used to direct military aggression towards China. 2 years after the end of the Second Imperialist War in 1945, the U.S. established the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Center in 1947, formerly known as the U.S. Pacific Command Center. Its area of responsibility encompasses about half the Earth's surface. The 36 nations that comprise the Asia-Pacific region are home to more than 50% of the world's population. The U.S. has 375,000 enlisted members of its Indo-Pacific Command, including 60% of its Navy ships, 55% of its armies, and 2/3 of its Marine Corps. In addition, with 85,000 forward deployed soldiers and a large amount of high-tech and new weaponry, the U.S. military has maintained its absolute supremacy in the Asia-Pacific over the years, while also continuing to seek new deployments, budgets, and resources, using the threat of China's and Russia's strategic rivalry as a justification. South Korea, Guam, Australia, Malaysia, and a host of other countries have strengthened military arrangements with the United States over the last decade. In 2007, the Bush administration announced the establishment of the U.S. African Command Structure.
We're going to Benin, Tanzania, Rwanda, Ghana, and Liberia. Each of these countries is blessed with natural beauty, vibrant culture, and an unmistakable spirit of energy and optimism. Africa in the 21st century is a continent of potential.
AFRICOM, that was then fully launched on October 1st, 2008. The U.S., which currently has the largest military budget in its history, spends nearly $2 billion per year to carry out imperialism in Africa. A study by the UN concluded that in the majority of cases, state action appears to be the primary factor finally pushing individuals into violent extremism in Africa. Of more than 500 former members of militant organizations interviewed for the report, 71% pointed to government action, including killing of a family member or friend, or arrest of a family member or friend, as the incident that prompted them to join a group. And the cycle continues. Drone attacks breed recruitment, which produces further terror attacks, which leave the states involved more dependent on U.S. military support. This is how the West creates the demand for AFRICOM. We must demand that the U.S. shut down AFRICOM and the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. No compromise, no retreat. No compromise, no retreat.
The independence of Ghana is not for anything. Oh, yes. I can tell them that the good people of this country, overwhelming majority of people of this country, flatly and totally rejects this attempt to send us back into colonialism. We will never be colonized again.
Yeah, I just want to chime in real quick before my son gets me to make a little food, but we will never be colonized again. Like, that's powerful. I just want to say that. I'm going to put that on the shirt or something.
Okay, so do I ask the question again? Did anyone get the question? Does anyone want to answer the question?
You mind repeating it? I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yes. So the struggles around policing and state violence in the US and Nigeria show that there are important connections to be made between policing, militarism, and imperialism. if we're to end state violence against Black people around the world? What do we need to understand about these connections, particularly with the expansion of Africa on the African continent?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think, you know, we need to understand that police officers and sheriffs are part of like a broader, like a global military enterprise. I think we saw even in the uprisings in 2020, we saw the National Guard troops serve as like a second line of defense against like more militant resistance this summer. So I think we need to understand that like global imperialism operates a global killing machine that, you know, serves to dominate oppressed people, African people, all colonized people, using military and paramilitary force, and AFRICOM is a big part of that. People on the continent face, you know, police, like brutal police, but also military forces. I think we could look at how AFRICOM has, you know, done so many drone strikes in Somalia. It's been upwards of, I think, 56 this year, just in 2020. They are supposed to target violent extremists, like that video talked about. But you know, I think it's important for us to understand the policing in the U.S. Against colonized people like us here in the U.S. is part of that broader system.
Yeah, and I try to say this on like every Zoom, even if it has nothing to do with anything. Police are the original slave catchers. And like all they changed was the uniform. We have to recognize that that doesn't just apply to Black people here. It relates to the entire Pan-African community. While I'm nowhere near a scholar on anything that's happening on the continent, what I do recognize is that the world is anti-Black. And these militaristic forces, much like Tunde said, they are mobilized against us as if we are the terrorists and we are the problem. Whenever there's a war on something, it's really a war on Black people, war on drugs, war on poverty, war on gangs. Here in Louisville, we had these place-based investigation units, which are really like get up in the Black communities, gentrify them, and terrorize them. That's what those squads did and what they continue to do, regardless of what the name is. So that is the connection for me. When I first read about NSARS, that popped up in my mind immediately. There's an occupation of Black people. There's a co-optation of Black leaders who are in positions of power, who gatekeep. And so I immediately thought, like, this is something I need to be involved in, because these are our sisters and brothers and gender non-conforming family all across the world dealing with this. So yeah, I immediately think of that. And that's one of the reasons I was drawn to Sunday school, is because we have an opportunity to really collaborate and move some work around this.
Mm-hmm. If I can add, so I think I agree with everything everyone has said, and I guess the more specific thing that I wanted to add was about the history. If you even take what Chantrice has said, there is the history. If we're looking at the police and the military, they serve the same essential purpose. Their founding is based on these forces. So in 1920 was the British colonial force of the British colonial police in Nigeria, and so once the independence came, they still maintain that same force. The Western powers give the semblance of independence, but the economy and everything still controlled by the outside, and they need the police to enforce this neo-colonial situation. Same thing with the U.S. The police reformed as a slave patrol, all that, and then as things evolve, then they're the same. I think so. The history is very informative. And it's important because what they do in every situation is try to make us believe that these forces are there to protect and serve us, or to protect and serve the regular people. And so often we even in the U.S., and I know it happens in parts of Africa too, probably in Nigeria, where the people call for the police because they believe they're there supposedly to fight crime. And I think somebody already dispelled that myth before. And in fact, often they're the perpetrators of many crimes. So that protect and serve, even the military that is in Africa to fight terrorism and all these things. When they, in fact, we just saw from the video. So we have to understand that we have to combat propaganda, no matter where it is. And so that's one thing. And the essential purpose is the same. and then also the propaganda is the same for us to get people to buy into it, and that's what we have to undermine.
One thing I just wanted to say really briefly, and I think, Tunde and Nefa's comments are really valuable here. And I think it's in the video is valuable in showing that, we in the US or folks on the continent, we can't understand our struggles as separate for a lot of reasons, including the fact that these systems that we are fighting from where we're at are actually the same system when we peel back the layers, right? So when we talk about policing here in the United States, how is it that, a local police force has military munitions, right? When you think about that, like very practical piece, that alone opens up a web of global relations that will allow you to see, oh, wow, so the military is in an unknown number of bases on the African continent. And then this requires us to ask, well, why is that? Why were the police created in the first place in the United States? Why were they created on the first place in the context of colonialism? Why does the military exist? What does it uphold? And I think we need to get very granular and specific about these conversations, right? So that would mean that we would look at Shell, for example, in Nigeria, and the politics of oil. It will require us to look at Coltan and the fact that in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, there's a genocide happening right now because we want to have cell phones, right? It requires us to think about the fact that imperialism, policing, militarism, all of this is about protecting global capital. And one of the things that we've done well in the past and not so well in this moment is really getting specific about the political actors and the economic actors who are benefiting from these arrangements, who are invested in chaos in each of these nations, in each of these communities, right? Because the chaos at the political level facilitates economic dispossession and expropriation that benefits global capital. And so I really want to challenge us to get a little more specific. And I don't mean in this conversation, I mean in general. And maybe this is a topic we can discuss. Like, how do we get more specific about the global actors who require militarism and policing in order to continue to further their economic interests?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So I know we have a ton of questions in the chat, a ton of comments. So I think we'll move on to that Q&A section of this this event. And yeah, I appreciate all of the contributions from all of our panelists so far. And we're just going to ask a few questions in this period. But I do want to raise up a couple of comments. I saw that I think your name is Ramier. You said that raising everyone to the same level and removing the advantages of power creates a truly democratic movement. I think that was in reaction to the comments about decentralized movements and everything. I thought that was a pretty interesting comment. I also saw that let's see, we also had a comment about the Africans being travelers. I believe this is during Nefa's comments that Africans were travelers and they've been doing trade and exploration across the Atlantic for millennia. We need to understand that. That was from Lydia. Lydia also said that, Sean Treese, during your presentation, you were preaching, we're living in police reform and we see where that has gotten us. Thank you, sis. Lydia also said in Nigeria, protesters and their supporters were targeted by having their bank accounts frozen and passports seized, which is despicable. And yeah, that is absolutely true. So thank you for that contribution, Lydia. Okay, so one more comment. I think Chima Obi also said that, yes, decentralized leadership is the way forward. All right, so let's move into some questions. And the first question that I want to ask our panelists is about Pan-Africanism today. And really, the crux of the question is that after being deliberately targeted and suppressed for many decades, Pan-Africanism is growing through the African world. what do we as activists, as organizers, what do we need to do to expand and protect the integrity of Pan-Africanism in the Black radical tradition? So does anyone want to take that question? Or should I repeat?
Yeah, I know I stay jumping in, so I'm gonna jump in. I love that you use the word integrity. I saw a comment, I can't remember if it was on Facebook or YouTube, on our video where people were saying they're promoting things about Black Lives Matter, and some bot kind of hits them up like, hey, you want to be an ambassador for this group? So there's a lot of co-optation. I've also seen, like, I get a weird feeling when I see white folks wear dashikis, I ain't gonna lie. But then there are also people who are born and raised in Ghana who get some type of feeling when Black Americans wear dashikis, right? So you have all these different nuances at play. And I think in order to preserve the integrity of the Pan-African experience and movement, it's about authenticity, it's about collaboration and intergenerational collaboration. Nanre has said this multiple times. Crystal, Yane have said this. We have to push for us to not just do the norm and not just do social media outreach. One thing I love about this group is that many of us have met in person, COVID safe, of course. Many of us have, read each other's work and followed each other's struggles. And in order to be an authentic representation of the Pan-African struggle, we have to recognize that we just have to be our natural selves. I mean, minus I got on a wig today, but you know what I mean? Like our natural selves, like who we are and who we were born to be. I think it was Nefa that talked about earlier, like our struggles come from a place of ancestors who have fought relentlessly to get us to this point. And so we have an inherent responsibility to make sure that we continue this struggle, that we, my co-host, and also that we, we just are out loud with it. And that will invite other people to be more comfortable with sharing who we are, what we stand for. And, we're blessed to have the internet to be able to do that, but also we have to do this in spaces where no one is watching, where no one can record it and post it on social media. And I think that opens up the door to maintaining that authenticity and integrity for our Pan-African experience.
I could jump in. I think I appreciate your comments, Chantrice. One of the things I think is really important is for us to do exactly what we're doing here, to bring organizers, like in the organizing community. A lot of times we're focused, and it makes sense. We talk about how politics are local, and that's true, and we focus on what's going on, but we often are hyper-focused. Like in Philadelphia, we've got a massive African community, and there a lot of times are not involved in the organizing space that that we're moving in. And so that's one of the things that some of us organizing in Philadelphia have actually been talking about, is how do we actually bring the organizing of our African, continental African community into the organizing of, those who are here as a result of the legacy of enslavement, those who are from other parts of the diaspora. How do we bring all of these organizing entities together and begin to work more collectively where we are locally? Because we have people, again, who are born on a continent, but who are here now. And so that's one way that we can begin to build our connections, is actually by organizing beyond boundaries, beyond the borders that are imposed, but also examining inside our own current communities where we're missing the mark on that. And I think that we also think about like what's popular, how things are promoted in our community through things like social media and through different forms of pop culture. And so, when we are marching and we talk about loving being Black, which is great, like we can also talk about the fact that we are African, right? We can start to put that into the minds of our community members, remembering that we are African primarily, and that we are African first, and that Blackness is a second, like it's a part of our Africanness, and building those connections, and really reinvigorating, our love for that reality of us being African and African first. That's why I like the term American African over African American, because American becomes like the the adjective, and and it specifies that we're African as opposed to African American, which says what kind of American we are. We are African first, and so I think that some of those are some of the kinds of approaches that we can take, as we're also, one last thing I'll say. One is that we have to recognize that when we say black, like black means a range of things. So I have a lot of people who are a part of my community that are continentally born, born on the African continent, who have been given the sense that they're not black because they don't know what grits are, for example, or something like that. So like moving beyond like these like internal kind of cultural norms to recognize that there's a range of our cultural norms and embracing and using language that communicates around that, I think is additionally important to us, for us to be able to elevate that that Pan-Africanness and overcoming also the fear or the idea that Africans born on a continent don't like us, right? Like there are a lot of things that people put out there, and we need to just confront those things and just bring the communities together as we're building the communities. When we're building community, we have to build the whole community. And remember that when we say all African lives matter, that's not just in the US, that's all over the world, and put that out there every time we march and every time we engage our larger community to normalize our connections to each other.
I wanted to comment on this briefly as well. And, this is something I think a lot about myself and in my work and my organizing work. I think, I look at some of our elders, who are still living, or, beloved freedom fighters who were Pan-Africanists. I've been reading Kwame Ture's autobiography, and like just looking at his life, like born in Trinidad, came up in the US, such an incredible contribution to our freedom struggle here, but, lives most of his life actually on the African continent, right? And, when you think about these kinds of lives, we don't see this example very much anymore, right? We have a beloved elder here, Dr. Anthony Montero, who I've talked extensively about his like Pan-African travels. Like this is someone who studied with Fred Hampton. This is someone who was with Huey in Cuba. He was at the Tanzania Pan-African Congress, right? Who like traveled throughout the communist world. And so we don't typically have these opportunities anymore, and we also don't necessarily take these opportunities anymore, and we're not better off for it. I understand the limitations of like travel and passports and visas and a lot of things the system puts in place to prevent our like African world from coming together and being with each other, but we really need to figure out how to attend to that. And we also need to figure out how to move beyond a kind of like diaspora wars conversation. Even though these things are important, I look at the Twitter threads, and I see, the conversation around kind of like kinship issues, right? You did that, or like y'all are, too focused on yourselves over here, or you didn't show up for us over here. Like we even saw that with NSARS, right? A kind of calling out of Black America for not showing up, so to speak. And so that is important work, but we have material interests together, right? Beyond the cultural, the kinship, we literally, when we understand the scope of this global structure that exists to kill us, we literally have material incentive to connect our struggles, because they are in fact connected. And so I think, deepening our political education around that, really recognizing the privilege that we have, that we might have wherever we are. This is something I've written about. Do African lives matter to Black lives matter? We say we are about globalism. All right, so where are the receipts of that, right? And so I think, we have to get real practical about this. Solidarity is, you know, there are symbolic dimensions of solidarity, but solidarity for me is some real practical stuff as well. And so I really want us to push ourselves. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, putting solidarity into practice better than we have.
Thank you, Crystal, and Chantrice, and thank you all for responding to that. I think that was really helpful. One comment from Ikemba was one of the books that inspired me on my journey was Ready for Revolution by Kwame Ture. I think that's the book that Crystal was referring to. Definitely a powerful book. Great, yeah, definitely a powerful one. Recommend that y'all get that and read it. I know we don't have a ton of time. Oh yeah, and I know we don't have a ton of time. I did want to bring up one exchange that I saw in the chat between Nasia 789 and Chimaobi about the co-opting or capitalization of BLM. I think Nasia was saying that she was reached out to be a brand ambassador by a BLM merchandise page, and Nasia, you felt uncomfortable, and Nasia asked if what the thoughts are in general of the co-opting of the movement and how we can collectively ensure it doesn't get further capitalized. Nasia also added that they are a 30-year-old Black woman from Philadelphia, and Chimaobi responded that you're making a fine observation, asking what made you uncomfortable. Did the movement that reached out seem disingenuous? And that commerce has a justifiably relevant place in BLM, that our movements are community funded, so injecting money through selling of merchandise or crafts made by ourselves is totally fine and necessary. And you know, just Chimaobi also went into all of the some other relevant details, just because our movements aren't funded by the state or other bodies like big NGOs and things like that, just because they're radical, I guess. So the money has to come from somewhere. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting conversation to uplift. I think it is interesting, the fact that we do have to pay for, certain things like this StreamYard, for example. It wasn't free. It's something we had to, BLM Philly had to spend money on. And I think, funding our movements is an important question, and how can we fund them? So Chantrice, I see you want to speak on this. Do you want to go ahead and take the floor?
So I'll say a couple things. One is that for safety reasons, you're not going to find Black Lives Matter in any of the chapters reaching out to random people and saying, do you want to be an ambassador? That's not a thing. We get those all the time, especially if you use the hashtag BLM or Black Lives Matter or Philly Demands or any of those. Like, there are people whose job it is to search those tags and reach out to those people. So if you see a page that is just like, be an ambassador and come sell our clothes, that's probably not Black Lives Matter. What is more likely though is that we'll be at pop-ups. I know in the era of Corona we don't have a lot of pop-up shops, but it'll be someone because most of us are vetting people. We're not just letting anyone in, we don't have offices and institutions like Tunde said. So a lot of these meetings are at somebody's house or at the cafe or whatever else, and we're not just letting folks in. So I would be very careful. To the person who responded to that woman's comment, yes, we are like very much mutual aid focused and grassroots funding and all that type of stuff. But more than likely, it's going to be a collective reaching out to the community, not in your DMs when they don't know you. So just be very careful, because the follow-up is often like, send me your Cash App and you send me some money and all type of shady stuff. So in none of the Black Lives Matter chapters I've worked with would be reaching out in that way. More than likely, it's going to be an invitation to a community event. And then from there, the people who continue to be involved and take initiative then will have more opportunities to lead and to support. So I would just be careful, especially if they're only reaching out on DMs and they have 5 followers, no photos, things like that. So yeah, just be careful. But again, we do need community support. All the organizations on this live stream right now are legit, and you can donate to their cash tags and whatnot.
Great, thank you, Chantrice. I'll just highlight one more comment, and then I think we'll get into final words from everyone. Letitia McDaniel Gripe said that we have had issues with local police creating distinctions between African immigrants and descendants and going to immigrant communities to create snitches against the ghetto Blacks. And Yane, if you want to speak to that briefly, you can go ahead, or Nanre, whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, I think I would like to just speak. That I think goes back to what we were talking about as it relates to both the issue of Pan-Africanism and how we build that up, and also to the issue of building community in general. There's no ability for police or any of these outside entities to turn us against each other when we have a well-built community amongst ourselves. And so I think, so much of what we want for ourselves and so much that is key to our liberation is very deeply connected to us building community with each other and making sure that we are taking care of each other's needs and we are keeping each other safe and secure. And so if we have a well-developed relationship between those of us who are born from the legacy of enslavement, those who are born from other parts of the diaspora, which would also probably be from the legacy of enslavement, those who are born on the continent, who are also, shaking off colonization. When we bring all of those people together in one community and recognize that one community, people can't get in there. They can't break us apart. That's where the power of the people comes from. The power of the people is final. The power of the people is infinite. And so that's what is the answer to these questions, building community, true community amongst each other and ourselves.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Yane. I think we'll head into final words. But yeah, I think this has been really great. Great to hear from everyone about the Black radical tradition, and then internationalism and how that fits into everything. I want to just briefly speak about, I think we need, like we've been saying, we need to localize, our struggles, but then also, make those connections between our organizing, between our movements, understanding the parallels and similarities, as well as the differences, because our enemies are thinking internationally. I think NEPFA posted a comment about the international body that for policing, right? And I recommend people read up on that. And just speaking to, I think it's called the International Association of Chiefs of Police, that actually trains police around the world. They're Nigerian police bodies that have been trained by that, and police forces on the continent. So I think we need to think internationally, and that's why I really like this Sunday school. I think we're moving in that direction, but we need to intensify that type of internationalism. Yeah, that's all I had to say. I'll pass it off to NEPFA to go next for final words.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess the only thing I'll say real quickly is that I think so that we have the vision for how we change things. We have some sort of theory of change. I think that when we make demands, they should be part of a strategy to build mass organization, and not with the expectation that the powers that be will comply with those demands. Most likely, if they're transformative and shift power, they won't. But they can be useful in organizing the people and galvanizing us to create the formations and things that we need to realize how to survive and also to assume power. Our goal has to be power, and that's what self-determination and decolonization is. And then as we're doing these things, we're doing the political education and making those transcontinental connections that address the international nature of this system that's oppressing us, imperialism. And so that's how we organize locally, and then we also make connections internationally to liberate the African world. That's it.
And maybe we can have Tone, if you're ready to go next.
Sure. So again, hello everyone. It was my pleasure to serve as a moderator this evening. I'd just like to, remind us, let history be our teacher. It's the movement before us. We know that this is something, a collective struggle, whether you are on the continent, in the US, within the diaspora. I know just in the brief experience I had with Iwa learning, like she's on the continent, I'm here in the US. There's so much being intentional about our discussions, being really focused and centering the movement, because that's what it's about. Just learning about history from, the antebellum, the Civil War, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, Levintowns, and what's still going on. There's so much within our work and our movement that unites us. And this is something that we have shared fate, and we can absolutely work together. And I look forward to this being a continuous thing. So thank you. I will pass it to Crystal.
I think I'm going to go at the end.
Yane, please.
Yeah, I just want to say that, well, you know what? I want to let Iwa go in case Iwa gets cut out. Iwa, please go ahead. So having technical difficulties.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes. So I have some questions now. I really want to apologize for my network issues. W.E.B. Du Bois's The Problem of Color Line was not confined just to the Negro problem of the United States, but also makes it clear that many Africans living on the African continent suffered under the yoke of colonial rule. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to.
Thank you, Iwa. I am looking forward to, I have not had an opportunity to travel to the African continent. I'm really looking forward to that. And I really hope that we will shift to a place where we can have more of those kinds of exchanges, where it becomes more accessible, because that true connection, I think, is really important. There's so much that we can learn from each other. And so staying connected around the world is beneficial to what it is that we are seeking to do in our local communities. And so I'm really excited about this endeavor, and really just want to offer my appreciation to Tone and Iwa for your moderation, to my co-panelists and co-presenters, Nefa, Chantrice, and Tunde, and to Crystal and Nanre for really setting the foundation for this, and laying all of this out, and taking and offering leadership in our leaderful moment and in this leaderful space. And so I just really am excited about us building community, building the world that we want to see, building the future. These are some comments that were also offered last week. And I think that is the key for us to really work on developing a collective vision, and then doing the work to systematize and embody that collective vision, sharing with each other, growing together as we move forward. That's where I think the power liberation and of the work is: learning from the past, building a vision for the future, and embodying that. I'll pass to Chantrice.
Thank you. I'm excited about turning up on all the oppressors. I've been very excited to see that people are ready to sustain the movement. Like, it's sexy in the beginning when we have the uprisings, like, yeah, fight the police. But then those same people later on are calling the police on Black folks. So I'm excited to continue this work. I'm very grateful that I was invited and allowed in this space where we have some real Pan-African pride and support and love. And then for Black Lives Matter Louisville, I dropped our eviction work tag, but there's so much to be done. And I just encourage anybody, regardless of how much you think that you are an activist, if you start doing the work. I appreciate Crystal and Yane especially, because I've talked to y'all a little bit more, and I encourage everybody, if you need to pick a BLM chapter, pick Philly. They have a lot of work to do. And I'm just really proud to be involved in this. Oh, should I pass it? My bad. I'm gonna pass it to Nefa because I've been
Nefa
messing with him all day.
Nanre's gonna go next.
What? Just joking. Got it.
Or maybe I think Nanre's gonna close. You've gone Tunde, correct? And Tone has gone. Okay, so I'll go, and then I'll allow Nanre to have the final word. This is really my heart is just so happy that we are able to do this. One of the things that I've been grateful for with our abolition summer here in the US is that, it's one thing for an opening for revolutionary struggle to appear, to manifest, but it's another thing for organizers, for everyday people who are already struggling, battling every day, dimensions of the violence of these state structures, to then like step into that opening, to step into that moment. And I've been so just like encouraged and heartened that, so many of us have had the opportunity to advance our struggle, and we have chosen to do that. And so I see this in a very similar light, right? Like we did not have to reach out to one another, but we are doing that, right? Like we did not have to try to create this space for more conversation across our struggles around the world, but we are trying to do that. And so I do want to highlight just a couple of final comments in the chat that I think sort of speak to some of these things and possible directions. We had Chimaobi say, I just wanted to say the series makes me genuinely happy. Ditto. This is bridging the divide between us and practically mobilizing the continent and the wider diaspora. We will succeed. Yes, we will win. Be on the Move also wrote that it would be very relevant and timely to do a Sunday school on grassroots fundraising and historical current examples. And I think this is such a great idea. We know that resources are one of the ways that states de-radicalize our movements and co-opt and hijack our movements. It's also one of the ways that we have had to be creative in order to sustain our struggles. And so I think this is a great idea that we'll circle back to and see how to pull together a conversation around. And I also just wanted to highlight some of the comments that came in. People were asking how to support the work that individual organizations represented here are doing. On Facebook, we included a link to how to support BLM Philly. We also had the Pan-African Community Action drop some ways to support PACA's work. Chantrice mentioned BLM Louisville's work, and there's Black Alliance for Peace here. There's a number of organizations that are represented in this space. And so one of the things that we're going to work on is putting together a website that pulls together resources. There have been a lot of book and reading and political education resources that have been mentioned. We want to pull all of those together for you. We want to make sure you know the organizations that are represented in this space. And we also want to let you know how to get involved in our work. And that could be joining our work. It could be supporting our work. And so we'll pull that together for you for our next Sunday session. So I will pass the mic to my wonderful co-convener, colleague, comrade, Nanre.
Whew, it's really such an amazing space and time, and really such an honor to be here at this particular moment with all of you. And I have learned so much today and just over the past few months and over the past few years. I just want to close with two main things, and I think we've highlighted everything I wanted to say has been highlighted. So it's a bit difficult to come in after such amazing speakers and organizers. But I just want to highlight that what divides us, I know we spoke a lot about kind of the divisions and just bringing it home to some of the reasons that we're having this Sunday school, is that there is so much intentionality. And I know some of our comrades have mentioned this, in dividing us. And so we need to have that same intentionality in bringing us together. And so understanding, I know we talked a little bit about the tensions even between African and African American communities here in the United States. And some of the messages also came in about how that's intentionally not just destroyed once, but constantly being agitated and make sure that these divisions continue. And so in all of our work, one of the things I learned so much from the movements here is about healing. I really, really embraced the idea of how the Black Lives Matter movement here and so many organizations here focus on the aspect of healing. And I think that our work really needs to be about that healing, about healing not just in our spaces, in our individual organizations, in our own countries, but across these lines. There are not only divisions between the US and Nigeria, there's also divisions between Nigeria and other countries. People don't even know what's going on in the struggle across the border. not even to talk about oceans away. But there's so many things that are just reinforcing this. And so I'm so happy that we have this space, but I feel it's just the beginning of a much larger movement. And I just want to close with saying that for me as an organizer, I've organized in Nigeria, I've organized in the UK, I've organized here in the US. And I feel that we're just part of a very important historical moment. And it really spoke to me this summer when for the first time, because I'm always seen like this crazy person, right? But for the first time, Nigerians were calling me and saying, oh my God, what is happening in the US? This is crazy. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've been saying this for decades. But it was just a very important moment when people woke up for the first time and said, oh my God, these people are really suffering. And it really touched me. And then it was like a deja vu moment when things started happening in Nigeria, and then people were reaching out to me and saying, oh my God, what's happening in Nigeria? And, you know, we spoke about some of our comrades, you know, Kwame Ture, and the particular moment in the 60s and the 70s where there was this Pan-African unity. And I'm very certain that our ancestors have opened up this opportunity, this particular moment, for us to reimagine and restore and reinvent another moment in time. It's such an important historical moment. And I feel that we all feel in our bodies and in our souls that this is such a critical time. But I do hope and I know and I pray that we will be able to capture that moment and live out the dream of what our ancestors envisioned for us collectively. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been a real blessing to be here today.
I almost don't even want to say anything after what you just said, because I'm literally on the verge of tears, just like understanding this moment and this opportunity that we have to further our collective struggles, right? And I so much relate. You know, I too have been that crazy person. And so this summer has been such a beautiful awakening, right? Reawakening. But we shouldn't let you go before we end by letting you know that next week we will be back with another Pan-African Activist Sunday School that will be focused on South Africa. So I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that, Nunre.
Yeah, so this journey is continuing, and so we're going to have some of our comrades from South Africa. Do watch out. We didn't really think through the timing, so there may be a slight change because South Africa is so much further ahead, both the US and Nigeria. But we're just hoping to really have a time to explore some of their struggles, and then moving forward, the struggles, the abodes must fall, but also historically. So we're taking us back historically to look at movements in South Africa across time, what we can learn from them, but also looking at more current activist moments and also community organizing and what that looks like among our brothers and sisters and our comrades in South Africa. So we're really looking forward to that time. Hope you would join us. And yeah, that's all.
Until next time. See you, everyone.
Bye. Take care.